Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by none other than Jonny Owen. Now, Jonny, welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. This is your second appearance on the podcast, and you were on here about 2 years ago. At that time, I got the feeling that you had been doing some research on Jock Stein. I then received this book, and this week we saw a trailer for The Three Kings. When did you decide to make this film?
It's great to be back, actually, Paul. Thanks for having me. It was my dad passed away in 2017, and he'd been ill for sort of quite a while, but he knew he was going to pass away. So he was very philosophical about it. My dad had worked underground. He was an electrician, and he'd worked in the steel works. It was nothing unusual about that from my generation, our fathers, to work in heavy industry. Like a lot of men that worked underground, he always pointed out other miners. So whenever Stein, Shankly and Busby were on TV, he'd go, they worked underground like me. And this was something I spoke to him about, bless him, when he was ill, and he laughed about it and smiled. And then he talked to me about those great men. And I think that when he went, I thought to myself, well, there's something in that. There's something in that generation and those men and where they worked and the kind of men they were, the lives they lived. That they were born into an era and a time that is almost difficult for us to imagine now, And I thought, well, it's time maybe to document something about them. There was a terrific series made about 25 years ago now by Hugh McIlvenney called The Football Men, which was fantastic. But I thought so much has happened in football since then, in the last quarter of a century, that I'd like to do something and, sort of tell the story from my perspective in the sense of, with everything that's happened in the meantime and the Leviathans, really, those clubs have become since then as well, how football has changed and how Scottish football has changed. So that's what it was. And I went to the people that had made Senna and Amy and Maradona, and they'd liked a film that I'd done before called I Believe in Miracles, and they asked me would I be interested in doing something with them. And this was the idea that I kind of said to them, and bless them, they went, yes, let's do that almost straight away. Leo Moynihan wanted to write the book, so I asked Leo to write the book. The book came out before the film because with everything that's happened, COVID and whatnot, there's been quite a lengthy delay on everything, which is fine. But we've decided to get it out now this autumn, whatever happens, really. I mean, we're going to try and get it in the cinemas in November. That'll be right across the UK. My feeling will be that I'd get your seat booked pretty quickly because obviously the cinemas, there's not a lot of chains open, but we're going to try and get in as many as we can. And get it out so people can see it on the big screen. Because I really want people to see it on the big screen as well, Paul. I think the story needs to be seen. And at the moment, because we're not being allowed into stadiums, it might be something really good for fans to be able to go to a cinema and watch, the story of what these men did in football, which is an incredible story in itself.
Absolutely. Now, Jonny, I share your interest in the generation of men who worked underground. My father himself was a striking miner back in 84 to 85. Now, you explained on your first appearance on A Celtic State of Mind how you had an affinity also with Celtic Football Club. Could you maybe explain to our listeners how you have this relationship with Celtic as a club?
I'm sorry, mate, I couldn't understand that. Could you type it for me? Or could you tell me you're affiliated with Celtic? I got it. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. It's a bit of a family story. In the mid-1970s, sort of into the late 70s, football tops weren't what they were now. So there was. I'm showing my age now. You just used to buy them, tops off the market to wear. And I can remember being a little kid, and I bought. My mother must have picked the top up for me, and it was a Rangers top. And I'm walking through the living room, and my old man says to me, "What top's that?" And he'd never said anything about it before, and I innocently said, "It's a Scottish top." And he said to me, "Well, you do know you're from a Welsh Celtic Catholic background." And I kind of went, all right. And he went, well, you meant to be supporting Celtic. And it was the first time I'd ever heard this. So that was my first time I'd ever heard the word Celtic mentioned as a kid. My dad saying it, you're a Celt, you're from a Catholic background. That's not your team. All right. So I was very aware then, sort of going into my early teens, about sort of Celtic. My dad had spoken with the Lisbon Lions, and obviously everybody knew about Stein working in playing in Llanelli. So there was things I was very aware of. And then what happened to me was I got Merthyr Tydfil got an arrangement going with Queen's Park fans. So we used to go and play them and they'd play us. This is in my late teens. So that was the first time I came to Glasgow. Instantly fell in love with the city, like so many people do. And the lad that I was paired up with, his name was Kevin Devine. Dizzy, they called him. I still his friend now, lives in New York. He lived in Jock Stein's old house, which is a remarkable thing. So I used to go and watch Queen's Park, and he used to take me to Celtic as well. So this is when I'm at late teens. So for the last 20, 30 years, I've been going to see Celtic every so often when I go up to Scotland. So I've seen the redevelopment of the stadium and all those kind of things. I've been to an Old Firm game. Great experiences. And my friends up there, Stephen Fox, Foxy, they're still my mates now, and they're Celtic fanatics. So when I told them I was making this film, they were really pleased about that. They were like, it's just quite a nice ring to the circle, really, that my dad grew up Welsh, and he loved that Celtic team, he loved Stein, and I had this relationship with these lads who've been friends all my life, and I'd stayed in Jock Stein's old house, which is remarkable, in Southwood Drive in Kings Park. I mean, they say to taxi drivers at that time, can you take us to the big man's house? And the taxi drivers still knew where Jock Stein's house was. It was an incredible thing. So it's always been something that I've been interested in doing, and I'm glad that I've got the point. And it is an incredible football club. It's interesting because when I did the story of the three men, Manchester United, Liverpool and Celtic have all been successful in their leaders before Stein, Shankly and Busby got to those football clubs. But there's absolutely no doubt that when they went to those football clubs, they changed them into something very, very different and special. And they've left their DNA in the football clubs, for me, the way they are, their personalities and everything about them, really. And Stein in particular, I became even more fascinated with. I mean, Leo Moynihan says this. I knew a lot about Shankly because Shankly was omnipresent in British football, and Busby, there was the Babes and all that. But Stein was the one that really fascinated me and Leo and a lot of other people because he was so instantly successful wherever he went. It was remarkable. It's one of the most remarkable stories in the history of football, what Celtic did. We all know that. But everywhere he went, Paul, was incredible. As soon as he went to Dunfermline, instant. As soon as he went to Hibs, instant. As soon as he went to Celtic, the turnaround. I think if I was a billionaire and I bought Merthyr Tydfil and I could pick the young manager, I picked Jock Stein in 1965 to come to Merthyr Tydfil. And I'd say, Jock, that's your football club, do what you want. And I'd put my house on the fact that you'd be successful within 6 months. Because his brain was so... I think he was such a football philosopher, and Ferguson talks about this as well. I mean, he went to Hungary and he watched the game against 53. He was always obsessed with football philosophy, and he was always thinking about the game. I think of the three of them, he kind of almost was Shankly was all passion, it was fantastic, and Liverpool is still a difficult place to go. Busby, was a genius at finding players, but Stein, I always think, even though the others were very, very brilliant when it comes to the game, I knew the game in a way that I don't know if a manager before or since has ever known the game in that period. He was remarkable.
When we spoke on the podcast first time round, Jonny, I got an inkling that you knew too much about Jock Stein. It wasn't a passing interest. It was almost as if you had already started your research. Is this your love letter to Scottish football?
Yeah, it is. I'm a very proud lover of Scottish football. I do a radio show on TalkSport and I get loads of tweets and mails about it. I go up as much as I can. I've seen football at all levels in Scotland, not just Celtic. I've seen like Queen's Park. I've been to see Partick Thistle. I think Scotland's got a very, very unique culture when it comes to football, and I love it. I love the fact that you could still have a pint. You go to games, the people, the support. And do you know what's really interesting? Because I've got a few mates who used to go do the German thing sort of 10, 15 years ago. And a lot of them are coming to Scottish football now. And I'm a bit nervous about the gentrification of Scottish football. Is it the next destination for people to start coming up to football? I mean, I know a lot of people go over to Dublin to see the Bohemians and those kind of teams as well. So that, it's not something that, is just unique to Germany. But I do think that Scotland is somewhere where a lot of fans of my age go and they go, oh, I love it up here. It's something still very, very real about the football in Scotland. And long may that continue. I'll be back up again soon. I'm hoping that this COVID eases off enough for me at least to come up and promote the film, because they say to me, just today in a meeting, they were like, Johnny, would you be okay to go to Glasgow for a week? And I was like, are you fucking serious? Just get me up there. But, I'm hoping that it'll be back out of the short circuit break that it's in at the moment. So fingers crossed.
It would be brilliant. I mean, when we're talking about football films being shown in cinemas, that's now become the norm. But what sports films change the attitudes of critics and audiences to a point where they're now viewed as integral to the documentary genre?
There's been quite a few, Paul. I mean, I think that the first one where people saw there's something different going on here was When We Were Kings, which is the Muhammad Ali documentary, which specifically concentrates on the period where he fought George Foreman in Zaire. It's a fantastic documentary, and they found a lot of old footage, and they kind of put it back together again. And I think that was the first template that's kind of ended up with stuff like The Last Dance that you've seen on recently on Netflix about the Chicago Bulls team. That was the first one that when I felt sports documentaries were finding their place in documentary filmmaking and being taken seriously by the newspapers and the critics and audiences as well. And then Senna came out in Britain, which was a fantastic film. And like I said, James, who's produced that film, is the producer on this film. And that sort of did well, basically, on the cinema circuit, and especially at DVD. And once you start being successful, people become very interested. They want you to make more, because there's a market for it, as they say. There was one for me which I absolutely loved, which is called Fire in Babylon, which was all about the great West Indian cricket team of the late 70s and early 80s. Not a great subject for Scotsman. I know you're not that fussed on cricket. I'm not a massive fan of cricket either, but I really love the West Indian team. I thought Viv Richards and Clive Lloyd and Michael Holden were great characters, So I loved that film. And that was the first film I saw where I thought, well, it's used sport and imagery and music really well together. And that's where I had a crack at I Believe in Miracles, which did remarkably well for me on, not just in cinema, but on DVD and on TV, all that kind of thing. And that was often another one I did. I did the one on Wales in the Euros because that was, that was something very close to my heart, because I'm a Welshman and I went out there. But this one is deeply personal because of my father and the industry and the world that I came from. And I feel a real attachment to the three men in Scotland. And I wanted to talk about Scotland in the context of football history, world football history as well, because it's really important. Scotland, fell in love with the game in a way that probably was unmatched anywhere in the world. You could probably say Brazil as well in the 50s was very similar. But record crowds were always broken in Glasgow. They played football in a very specific way. People talk about it quite a lot. They played a very specific short passing game. In England, the game had grown out of this village to village, sort of almost like a rugby feel, where you charged one another. In Scotland, it was very skillful. And for 100 years, the spine of the great English teams that, dominated Europe were often Scotsmen, So the tradition Scotland had of producing not just managers, but players was central to the British game and the British identity. And that's something I grew up with. I grew up in the period when Wales and Scotland were fierce rivals in 78 and 85, qualifying for World Cups. And my dad said something really interesting to me once. My dad was a very, very good footballer. He was offered, he could have gone to Sheffield Wednesday and Aston Villa. And in those days, he got an apprenticeship to be an electrician with the NCB. And it was actually more lucrative for him to stay at the NCB and do his apprenticeship. So he ended up playing for Barrytown and people like that. But I always remember him saying to me, he played for the Welsh Army, National Service. And again, this is something you just remember as a kid. And he went, we beat Northern Ireland. They were decent. And we drew with England. And he said, we just couldn't get any of the Scots. They were too good for us, And I always remember stuck in my head that, this is the early 60s. And he was going, they're boys from Motherwell, and boys from Partick Thistle in the army because they were doing national service. And he said, we just couldn't get near them. So this is something I think I've always kind of kept with me, really, all my life. But I'm really glad that I'm able to do a film. Like I said, I call it my love letter to Scottish football. The kind of younger audiences can see and can hear about, because it's never a fluke why these people come from these places. It's never a fluke that Scotland produced that many footballers. Paddy Barclay said a brilliant statement once. He said, somebody like Matt Busby, Alex James lived in his street. That's like Lionel Messi now living in your street. It's going to have an influence on you, And he said that basically being in Scotland was like being in the coffee houses of Vienna in the year of revolution in 1848. That's what it was like growing up in Glasgow in the early part of the 20th century and the surrounding areas. You were just immersed in football and its culture and the way it's played. And of course, what happens is people like Matt Busby, Jock Stein, Ferguson a bit later. They grow out of that, and that's what happens, and that's what the film's about.
When I look at the three figures, Jonny, how pivotal do you think their success was in their life lessons that they were taught at the coalface? They were all miners from mining villages.
I'd say it was absolutely central. It's really interesting because obviously, you come from a mining background yourself. The thing about miners was this: they were really organised, they were unionised, they had to argue a point, they had to get on, they had to show teamwork, camaraderie. I mean, there's all the central tenets of being a great football manager. If you want to argue a point as a union man, and you have to argue it well against the coal owners, you've got to be able to get it across succinctly. You've got to get the men to back you. These are all things that were very much part of the miners and their union. All things, like you're saying, you need when you go into any kind of management, and especially football management. So just looking after one another's, backs, making sure down there in the dark, as they say, you've got to be friends. There's no time for religious differences or political differences. Otherwise, you could die. So those things shape those men. Those communities shape those men. And it's almost difficult for us to understand how close they were. They had to be to survive. There was no welfare state, certainly before the Second World War. So, penury and poverty were very real things that could happen at any second. So families had to band together and look after each other. Neighbours had to band together and look after one another. And it's really interesting that the three men instantly went to the crowds of those, major industrial cities, the Manchesters and Liverpools and the Glasgows, and said, we need to be all in this together. The great story of Steen, opening the window of the dressing room and saying, listen to the sound of the people come in. Those are the people you need to entertain today. Busby looking across the great mills of Salford and saying, it's all about them this weekend. And Shankly talking about being one of the cop. He said, I'm one of them and they're one of me. These are things that, miners have. My father used to say I talk about my father quite a lot because he's obviously very important to me in the film. He used to say this great thing to me. He used to say, the miners used to say, you're not better than anybody else, but you're just as good as them, which I think is a wonderful statement and almost philosophy to have in life, because it gives you that sort of belief that, you can be yourself and stand up for yourself. It doesn't mean you never look down on anybody. It's almost kind of a very socialist thing, as Shankly said. Socialist football is what you encourage. If you all work together, you can all win a medal. And even Steen, those great golden moments of when you got the camera on him, when he famously says, if somebody's having a bad game, help them out. He says that really famous thing in the documentary that followed him that year, that sensational year. Probably the greatest year of any domestic football team in the history of the game. Won every trophy that was available to them. Remarkable. And not just won every trophy and the most difficult trophy there is to win, and still is, domestic trophy on the planet. But it's just the line he says, if somebody's having a bad game, help them out. And it's just one beautiful, succinct line that comes almost straight down from the pits. If somebody's having a bad day, you've got to look after them. You've got to help each other because it's really important. And down there, you might not survive, So they took those things from the pits, their lives, their communities, and they took them out and took them on the football pitch. I mean, Busby, for argument's sake. I mean, what a remarkable man. His father was killed in the First World War. He was already the senior Busby left living by the time of 7, 8 years of age. And his half-brother, his mother married again, talks about him constantly being the man of the house from like 9. So, from 9 years of age, Matt Busby was very aware that he had to behave a certain way to make sure his family were okay. And he took all those qualities from Scotland to Manchester, where he played, and into managing Manchester United. Remarkable men.
One thing that I've loved about your films to date, Jonny, is the importance you place on the soundtrack. The music is always perfect and it's fitting to the subject. How do you tackle a film like this when it comes to the music accompaniment?
I was very lucky. I'm a huge fan of Richard Hawley, the Sheffield singer, who's very successful at the moment. And he comes from a very industrial background. His father, his family worked in the steelworks in Sheffield. And I had a chat to him when I was doing this film. And he said to me, well, look, I'd love to be involved in some way. So Richard and me sat down and we spoke about, what kind of music we'd use. And from the very start, you'll see, I really like Richard's stuff, which is almost like psychedelic heavy metal. And it sounds like industry to me. It sounds like, almost slightly the darkness and it's big, and I wanted to use that kind of stuff in the film. And it fitted so well, or especially the early stuff of men and ground and the dockyards of Glasgow and Liverpool. And that's what we did, really. We kind of use this almost big guitar sound, and it kind of pushes you through, and it's got a very rhythmic thing, which is the sound to me of picks hitting a coal face, or, a giant press inside a steelworks. And that's what we did, really. We tried to use stuff like that, and it really worked, because I was very aware that certainly in cases I'd be using sometimes 70-year-old football, to a young audience. So I needed to cut it in a very specific way, and I needed to play music which keeps them engaged. Because if you're 18 years of age, you see men in big shorts running around in black and white, you're thinking, wow, it's a million miles from where football is now. But then the irony is, if you start cutting it and you start putting great music to it, suddenly, Duncan Edwards, for argument's sake, looks like what he is, a colossus, and a fantastic footballer, and that's what we tried to do. I tried to make it so a young person can watch this film and they stay with it. They keep the pace, and you keep the shots really interesting, and you just keep telling this story. Because the difficulty I had making this film was they lived such remarkable lives as players as well as managers that I didn't have time to. I had to be really brutal sometimes with some of the stuff I was going to put in there, because I only had a certain amount of time. If you're telling the story of three of the most remarkable managers that have existed in 20th century football, and you've only got an hour and 50 minutes, then you've got to move. And I think that helps the film, because, like I said, somebody young watching the film will understand, the story, but they won't get bored. The pace will keep them with the film.
You're speaking about three men who shaped not only the British game, but the world game. And back on the 29th of April 1978, Sir Alex Ferguson managed his final game in charge of St Mirren, and they beat Celtic 3-1 at Love Street. Now, that was, ironically enough, Jock Stein's last match in charge of Celtic. It was a passing of the baton, if you like. Do you feel that great bloodline of Scottish managers has dried up and it's gone? It's a bygone era.
Yeah, it's interesting, because Ferguson is seen as kind of, the last of the truly, truly great Scottish managers. It's interesting with Ferguson and his relationship with Stein in particular, because he mentions Busby, obviously, because he went to Manchester United and Busby was still not there, but in the sense he had been some 10 years previously, but he was still at an office, and he'd call in, and he said he talked to him, and he actually says he laments almost that he wished he'd talked to him a bit more. But his relationship with Stein was the one for Ferguson. There was a 4-4-2 competition to end the 20th century, 1999, and great managers were asked to pick their greatest manager, and Ferguson picked Jock Stein. He said he's the greatest manager of all time. And obviously he said it's because of the amount of stuff that he won, and it's the trophies that he won, and we won the European Cup with the Glasgow District 11, as he says. And it's really interesting that Shankly says something very similar. He says in the film, Glasgow Celtic are the most successful football club in the world. And this is the mid-70s. And the guy goes, well, why would you say that? And he goes, well, look what they've just won. They've won everything. And they've won European Cups. They've got the European Cup finals. They've beaten Leeds, And it's really interesting, because a young British audience, especially in England, would hear that now and go, really? And you go, yeah. Every time Celtic played anybody who were the English champions at that time, they won, So there's really interesting moments there where they talk about stuff like that. The Scottish manager thing is it's interesting, because it was such a cliche in football that you'd got a good Scottish manager in, and that would sort of, it's almost sort of taken as read, and that's because of them. I'm trying to think. There's the lad at Preston. No, he's got a good reputation. It's Alex Neil, but there's not many. And certainly not people of the stature in the game like your Fergusons and that. The Ferguson-Stein relationship, because obviously they managed Scotland together as well. And Ferguson talks about long nights of talking about football, and Stein would make a cup of tea, and he'd keep making tea because he never drank, Jock, and he'd keep having tea all night. And he said he just would talk about football over and over and over and over again. And you can see it had a real effect on Ferguson. And I think it's fair to say of the three of them, and I think Ferguson would agree with this, of the three of them, Stein is the biggest influence on Alex Ferguson. No doubt about that. I mean, even to what he did in the European Cup and his cup final, where Stein gave him the advice to, I think he gave Alfredo Di Stefano some kind of present, didn't he? As if to say, he said, make him feel as if, you're just happy to be playing them, which is what Jock did against Inter Milan. And Ferguson did it. And he said it worked, And so I think it's a very poignant thing. It's in passing of the baton, and the night that Big Jock passed away, I was there. I was at that game, and my overriding memory as well after the match was the silence in the crowd, and the silence leaking into the crowd because Scotland had their yellow flags and they were waving them, and there was thousands of the Tartan Army there, incredible support. But as word was spreading, because it was transistor radios in those days, my father and my grandfather with me, my father said, "Is it true about Steen?" And somebody had said something, and the Scots fans are coming out, and I can remember them getting quieter, but obviously word was spreading. And that was a night that really stayed with me because I was going home in the car and in my grandfather's car, and that just, it was very stilted conversation, and it was almost like, I imagine, when a great king passes or a great warrior in a tribe, they were miners, and he was one of them. That's how it felt to me. It was had a real impact on me.
Now, there's a famous quote, Jonny, from Jock Stein, and it's, "You play a football match without fans, you've got nothing." How much is that resonating in this day and age, going through what we are going through at the moment?
I know it's remarkable, isn't it? I mean, the film, a few people have said about that in the trailer. The film's really resonates even more than ever. I'm lucky that I work in football. I work for Nottingham Forest. Look after the communication and media stuff, and I go to some games, and I find it very, very difficult. And in all credit to the CEO and the chairman, they both said to me, "You don't have to come." I find it almost impossible to watch football matches without fans there. That's how important they are to me personally. It's a strange experience. And Jock got it absolutely right. And it's amazing now. So many clubs and so many countries have picked up on that saying. You see it on banners in Germany and all over the world, Spain. And he was absolutely right, And he loved, Archie McPherson gives me a great line, because Archie knew him really well. And Archie said to me, he loved the Celtic supporters. He loved them, He said it was very poignant. He said, not everybody loved Jock inside Celtic because of his religion, which sounds astonishing to us now in the modern age, considering what he'd won. But he said he loved the Celtic supporters in a way that, it's you can't fake. He just genuinely loved them, And I thought it was quite a beautiful thing, really, to say. And I love the fact that Celtic supporters are so proud of him as well, really. That he was a man that kind of, went to a different tribe. He lost friends from where he was from, Burnbank. But once he was leading that other tribe, there was no greater king for them, really. Do you know what I mean? He was an extraordinary. And Ferguson said something as well. He said he never ever said a bad word about Celtic. Wouldn't. He said, impossible. He said, and Ferguson goes, I was more, Jock, what they did, and he was like, wouldn't have it. No. Great club. And I just think there's something quite beautiful about that. What Jock and Celtic fans mean to each other, even now in the year 2020.
Now, when I'm looking at the three figures, the three kings that you've mentioned, I find it incredible that you've managed to compress all that into one film. Was it ever a consideration for this to be a trilogy?
Well, it was a funny thing. I was, when I was doing it, starting it, I thought myself, I bit off more than I could chew by sticking all this into a film. And Amazon, I think, came in and said, would you want to do a series? And I was that close because I thought myself, I could do 5 or 6 parts here. But at that point, we were like, well, look, we want to make it I want to introduce a young audience across the world to this, So I think for Celtic fans, you'd have loved like 5 hours of it, and I loved it. But I wanted to make something which other fans of other clubs can watch and go, wow, that was an amazing story. So that's where I kind of I thought about. It's a funny thing as well. The producer said to me the other day, he went to me, if this takes off, wouldn't it be a great drama series? He said, Kieran Hines as Steen and Mullen as Shankly, and I was like, yeah. So you don't know. I mean, listen, it is an amazing story. So you just don't know where these things are going to end up. This is the latest, and I'm really pleased to have done it. I met with Jock's grandson. It was lovely in Glasgow when I was up last. He was on his bike. He turned up in a cafe, and it's a bit like you almost. And it was beautiful actually, because he's got Jock's eyes. And when you sit and talking to him, you get to know this person you're making a film about so well, and he's such a giant, the game. So often you're sitting there with a grandson, you think, God, you actually look like Jock every now and then. Do you know what I mean? He's just a lad having a chat, going, he's still a massive Celtic fan, goes to games and all the rest of it. So it's an interesting thing, you know. And, you know, I spoke to Shankly's granddaughter, and they just, because of the men and the time they lived in, and like now, you know, they didn't have masses of wealth that they left the families. Their families lived good lives, but nothing that you'd expect, you know, that the lives of managers and footballers have now. You know, they're just people who are obviously ridiculously proud of what their grandfathers are and what they've done. So yeah, you realise that you know, they still have roots in these places. Jock's really interesting because what is it? Paddy Barclay said, think he's gripped by the soil of North Lanarkshire. He can't leave. He tries Leeds for a bit. It's no good for him, Jock. Jock's a Scotsman and he's not going anywhere. You know, it took Busby a long time. You know, cried when he first got to Manchester, didn't like it. Shankly's more of a buzzsaw, really. He's off around the place as soon as he can from Asia. But Steen's the one. Steen's like, nah, it's no good for me anywhere other than around here, and I'm no good. And I understand that.
Oh, definitely. You're speaking about some of the people that you've spoken to whilst researching the film. Did you get an opportunity to chat to any of the Lisbon Lions for the film itself?
No, I didn't. I didn't want to speak to any of the players, not for any particular reason. What I thought was I was just going to speak to writers, historians, one expert on each. And then I thought myself, I'm going to do what they did for Senna and things like that. I'm going to build it on all the stuff that I could find in the archive at the time, because I think there was a fantastic documentary about the Lisbon Lions on the anniversary in 2017, I think it was, which was done brilliantly. So I was a bit like, I don't think there's anything more I can do to that. I'm always very aware that sometimes people do things superbly, so you don't want to go in and say, you know, because there's nothing different really for me to have done on them. What I wanted to do is I wanted to get people talking about what that was and what an achievement that was from the outside. So people like Paddy Barclay and Archie McPherson, which is terrific actually. Obviously Archie's voice is on the commentary, you know, trying to end the ice age of European football. That great line as they come on half time, which is, for a filmmaker, then Archie in 1967 has set me up beautifully dramatically to sort of like to go into the second half. And then, you know, I got cream. I feel free kicks in when Tommy Gemmell scores. Bum 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 bum. And you got a crowd coming in and they win. It's just brilliant. And so you can turn like an amazing moment into great filmic art if you can. Do you know what I mean? Because you can get the music and you can cut the crowds and all that. And you know, there's some really, really famous shots, I know. But when you're making a film about Jock Stein specifically, and you've got the fella with the Jock Stein, and he's coloured in the Jock Stein famously, and he points to it. I mean, somebody's got to recreate that T-shirt. You'd sell 100,000 surely with the same style of colouring. Do you know what I mean? You just go, well, there's a T-shirt there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Definitely.
So yeah, I wanted to do it in a new way if I possibly could. You know, I wanted to do, you know, my interpretation of it, you know, with the music and the people talking, and, you know, let the images then, you know, tell the story themselves, really.
Now, tell us, Jonny, this is going to be a limited cinema release under the circumstances, but there is an opportunity for fans to register online. Tell us where we can do that.
Well, the fans already been brilliant, and I imagine a lot of them are Celtic fans, because there's an email you can get, which is on the website, www.threekings.co.uk. I'm sure you'll put it up for me, Paul, as well. And you can register for an email. My message is going to be, because of COVID, unfortunately, and Cineworld chain shut in, I have got Showcase and a few others, big chains, who've been brilliant. And they said to me, it's still open at the moment. And I'm hoping in Scotland, because you've got this circuit break that's happening, that when the film's ready for release the first week of November, it'll be okay and in cinemas. But if you sign up to that website, you can get an email notification of when the dates are released. They're releasing the dates specifically and which cinemas are showing it next week. And I think it's obviously going to be on in quite a few places in Glasgow. If there's enough of a demand, and I'm hoping so, then it might run for a week or two there. And that's what I'm hoping, and they can keep it going then. And it's just a great chance for me to show the Celtic fans and Scottish football, you know, what it means to me, and hopefully they can really enjoy it. What's been a difficult time for everybody, really, and they can revel in their marvellous and amazing history.
Definitely. Now, we couldn't let you go, Jonny, without asking you your prediction for this Saturday's game against Rangers.
I knew you'd do this. Well, do you know what? It's really interesting actually, because in the film I say this: Manchester United and Liverpool, a bit like the Gallaghers, they need each other really in a way. And I think Celtic and Rangers have got this incredible. Rangers are quite important in the film because they spur Celtic this incredible success because they're very good in the mid 1960s. They're really, really good team, Rangers, and Celtic have to be good, and they are, And Jock, he always says this is his big game, Celtic Rangers. This is the one that means something to him. So I love all that history, and I still think it's the best derby in the world. And I mean that genuinely. It's fantastic. And I know it has its problems and all the rest of it, but that it does make it an extraordinary experience when I've been. The 10-year thing is a great motivation for Celtic. Do you know what I mean? Also, it's a great motivation for Rangers because they want to stop you. And I've got a quick story. My mate Dizzy, Kevin Devine, Foxy, and all them lads. My daughter was just born, and when you stopped Rangers getting the 10 in a row, Wim Jansen, was it Wim Jansen?
Yeah.
He rang me at 3 o'clock in the morning, and my daughter was a baby, and they woke the baby up. My ex-wife, my ex-wife, she said, "What's somebody doing ringing this time in the morning?" And I went, "Celtic have just stopped Rangers winning 10 titles. What can I do?" Do you know what I mean? So I know how much it means to everybody out there. So I'm going for a Celtic 2-1 win.
Oh, brilliant. Now, Jonny, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you again on A Celtic State of Mind. We will keep pushing this movie as much as we can. And in the meantime, all that's left for me to say is thank you, Jonny Owen, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody for their support already. It's been fantastic.